Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mama Project podcast. I have a guest for us today. I have Aileen Cronin. She is a dog and tot safety expert and a motherhood advocate. I'm really excited to talk to her about this today because I know that many of you that listen to the show and that follow me on Instagram, you have babies and you have dogs. And so I thought that this was a really unique conversation to have about introducing, a baby to a family that has dogs and how to navigate that change for your dog and for your family. So, Aileen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this topic. I think it's such a big part of the family conversation.
Absolutely. So, before we get into what you're doing now, give us a little brief bio on what you were doing before, you kind of niched into this specific topic. How long have you been working with dogs? Just like before you became a mom, what were you doing up until what you're doing now?
Well, I got into training dogs because I found a dog on the street. He jumped into my car and we were connected immediately. And was a really scary, dangerous dog. And he was willing to bite me. He was willing to bite other people. And so I kind of went on this journey as a young, 20 something, trying to figure out like how I was going to save this dog. And it led to me leaving corporate America, selling my house and learning from a bunch of different people how to train dogs. And so I started this dog training company in Arizona. And my goal was to keep dogs in homes and help people with their difficult dogs. And so I've been a dog trainer for about 10 years now. And yeah, that's kind of what I was doing before. And then I met my husband and we decided to start our family. And I had to really take a look at, the types of dogs we were working with and evaluate what was safe for like our family. And that's kind of how I fell into this niche of dogs and kids because it was a difficult transition for me personally in terms of like my personal goals, um, of who I wanted to help. And so that's just been its own kind of journey. But yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about what exactly you help clients with and like what their biggest questions or issues are that you address.
Sure. My main goal is to help families prepare their dog for a child. And so I really focus on helping the parents understand what's going to change for the dog, why it's difficult for them, the types of rules that they want to have in place. And not every dog is the same. So not everyone's set of rules is going to be, like exactly the same. And so my goal is to help people evaluate the certain things that their dog is going to struggle with and give them, strategies to prepare the dog for that big change. The time that people seek me out the most, other than when they're expecting, is when their child starts to crawl. And the big difference there is that when you have a newborn, the dog can enter the space and leave the space, and that's very guided by the adult. And when your child can crawl, now your child can enter the dog space without permission or consent, and that can lead to a very uncomfortable position for your dog. And so that's usually, I get a lot of calls then. And most recently, I've had a lot of people reaching out because they want to add a dog to their family and they want help picking the right temperament for their family and their lifestyle.
So let's talk a little bit about the how you prepare your dog for a baby's arrival.
Sure. The one of the first things I do is I take a look at where they plan to have baby sleep. And I have a rule across the board that anywhere the baby is sleeping is a no-go zone for the dog. So if the baby will be in a bedside bassinet, in your bedroom, I would remove access to your bed, perhaps even your bedroom, depending on the temperament of the dog. And mostly because it's really hard for us when we wake up in the middle of the night and we tend to our crying baby. They need to be fed, or we're pumping, or we're doing all these different things. And it can be overwhelming just that task alone. So the added layer of the dog being there can either be, frustrating or challenging, or they get in the way, or they step on cords, they spill things, or you trip on them. And so it's just like safest to have the dog outside of that primary sleeping area. And then also places like the couch, if you're going to be using any type of baby lounger, or if you're going to be sitting with the baby on the couch, you don't want there to be an accident where the dog jumps up on the couch and the baby's there and they land on the baby. And then most importantly, what will eventually be their nursery or their room. And that's it's nice to have those boundaries set before the baby comes, because you can always give that space back, but it's really difficult to offer it to them, let them invade the baby's intimate space, and then try to take it away. That's far more confusing for the dog.
So, do happy and friendly and basic, very mild mannered temperament, because you talk about temperament a lot, right? Do those type of dogs need training and boundaries also when bringing a baby home? So, like very chill dogs.
Yeah, even excitement can even be dangerous for a child. I mean, think about a happy-go-lucky 20-pound beautifully happy golden doodle at the door. They could come up and their excitement can get in the way while you're walking. You can trip and fall. Those are more of the types of things that I see. It's that their joy can be kind of in the way at times, or their exuberance can lead to just feeling like they're in the baby space too much. And yeah, for sure, there's definitely, like, when my babies were born, my dogs were 15 and 16 years old. They couldn't do anything with much speed. So the more we focused on with them, more like how our child like interacted with them very gently, like very slowly. They couldn't see so well. So every dog can benefit from being prepared, even if they're like a super happy-go-lucky dog.
You talk a little bit about before we came on about introducing a baby to a dog, like not being a one-time event. Do you suggest that they do something before the baby arrives, like get them used to the idea that like a baby is coming? Like what do you mean by that? And like how do you want your clients or people that you work with to navigate introducing a baby, kind of ongoing, not just one time?
Oh, yeah. So before the baby is born, it's ideal to have, your bouncers, your playpens, everything. Bring those things out so the dog can get used to them and explore those things before the baby is a part of them. And you'll want to be able to interrupt them getting too close to that intimate space. So when I say intimate space, I mean basically like a 3-foot bubble around the baby. So if the baby's on a play mat, I wouldn't allow the dog to step onto the play mat for a couple of reasons. I'm also a little bit of a germy, I don't like germs kind of person. So I'm like, dogs walk outside on the grass, they come in and they walk where your baby's laying down. That to me is just a little bit icky. Or if you have like a, what's the word, like a mamaroo type thing, like a bouncer. You want to make sure that the dog isn't invading the personal space of that, because that means if they're getting really close into it, they're getting right into your baby's face. So just giving them a bubble around all of those baby objects, and then also teaching them, to respect your space. So when you're pregnant, baby is inside on your belly. You're probably naturally going to deter them away from jumping on your belly, right? So then baby is born and baby is close to the chest. It is kind of this natural evolution that you're just going to continue to keep that space around you and wherever the baby is. Um, and when I say it's like not a one-time event, we always see, the videos on Instagram. People come in with the baby carrier and the dog meets the baby, and oh, isn't it so sweet? That is just one moment in a lifetime of interactions between this dog and this baby. And it's the moment where the baby is not doing anything. The dog is completely controlling the interaction. And so when I say the introduction is not a one-time event, it's going to be something that's taking place over that like entire first year. Your dog is developing associations to the sounds of the baby, the sights of the baby, um, the movements of the baby, and the baby changes so much that whole first year that you have so many opportunities to influence that relationship. I just don't want people to think because they walked into the door with the baby that the dog and the baby are fine because they liked each other. It's something that's going to grow over time. Just like I really liked my husband on our first date, but we still had a lot of work to do before we could really call ourselves partners, right?
That's so funny. So, what do moms struggle with the most in their relationship with their dog after the baby is born?
I talk to a lot of moms who feel guilty. They say things like, um, the dog annoys them now, or it feels really overwhelming to care for them while they're caring for the baby. They find it challenging to do things together. And I think that I just always want to be honest with expecting parents that I don't believe that you will love your dog less. I just believe that when your child is born, it's a different type of love, even than the love you have for your spouse. I joke with my husband that my love for him is entirely conditional. We made an agreement, it was a contract. We shared it in front of a crowd of people. Everyone was there, they know the rules. But there are definitely things in my relationship with my child that love, that unconditional love, it's just a different type of love. And so I think for parents it can be difficult to live with the feelings that they thought that nothing in that relationship would change, and now that it has changed, they don't know how to fix it, and so they just end up feeling guilty. And I don't think that we need to be that hard on ourselves. If we just understand and know going into it that it's just going to change even for a little while, um, we need to be gentle with ourselves, and there's things that we can do to mitigate some of that guilt, some planning that we can do beforehand so we don't have to feel so bad about it. Because by the time I'm coming in, there's generally a problem and people just feel terrible and they don't know how to get out of it, right?
It's so funny how you say that the relationship changes because I was naive to that. Like, oh, we introduced her and the dogs are fine. But yeah, I think definitely now that she's mobile, I mean, she's almost 2. So, like, when she became mobile, like, that changed everything, right? So, right, about like boundaries and keeping her safe. Like, even though I have very gentle dogs, I have very gentle, very, you know, um, loving dogs, and it still had to be mindful because even you just don't know what could like trigger them or upset them. So talk a little bit about the crawling milestone and why it can be dangerous when dogs are a part of the equation.
I think basically because they, now that the child can enter the space and they have no, like, they've never read news stories about dog bites. They don't understand that dogs can be dangerous, or they live in a household with very mellow dogs where they can, or like not even just mellow, very resilient dogs, as I would say, dogs that are much more tolerant. And then they go to a friend's house, or you go to you go to another home where there is a dog that isn't used to crawling kids, that isn't as tolerant, that isn't as resilient. And then you kind of have a recipe for disaster. And so I always tell people, when you're teaching your child how to interact with your dog, you're really teaching them how to interact with all dogs, because they don't have the understanding that dogs have different temperaments. They don't think about like, oh, well, my dogs are nice, but my neighbor's dog isn't the same way. To them, a dog is a dog. That is their association of how a dog is, and they interact with all dogs the way they interact with their own dog. So it can be a challenge for us as parents to be that mindful, and it is exhausting. Like for the first year and a half of my daughter's life, I didn't want to work when I was hanging out with friends, so we didn't go to friends' houses that had dogs, because I didn't want to be dismissed. I didn't want people to tell me like, oh no, my dog's great with kids. Like, that's my decision as a parent, right? And so it really does begin at home. And we have, I tell people, like, there's no way around it. There's no dog training between dogs and kids that doesn't include crates or a baby gate or boundaries. That is just going to be a natural part of it, because every event has rules, right? So like, If you don't want your dog to be eating food from the high chair, then they've got to have a boundary to be out of the kitchen during meal times. If Because that extends to, oh, I'm 2 and I'm walking around with snacks in my hand. This just happened yesterday at my house. My 1.5-year-old had like a little snack bar, and our new puppy, who's only like 5 months old, is following him around. And I can see her, she wants to take it. And I just had to go and leash the dog and sit with the dog and let him finish his snack. And then they were able to play together again. These associations transfer to all different aspects of their life. It's not just one thing, it is an entire picture that we're painting for the whole family. Dogs are not just like kids. They're not able to say like, oh, well, this is okay in this situation, but it's not okay in this situation. You have to like have one firm rule with them.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So what about behavior versus training? What's the difference?
So I work with a lot of people who have really good dogs, and they're like, oh, they're perfectly trained and they listen to me and they'll lay on their place and they'll lay on their bed. And they'll do all of the things, but they still don't seem comfortable with my child. And the truth is, having a dog that obeys a command does not mean you have a dog that feels comfortable, right? So, like the last person that I helped with rehoming their dog, they had a 115-pound dog, and that dog would lay on its place bed all day long and not move. And anytime the 2-year-old approached, it looked so extremely uncomfortable that now the training was telling the dog to stay in a situation that it really wanted to flee from. And when it tried to move, they wanted to keep it on its place because that's training. But to me, behavior says honor the dog's feeling to exit that situation, because the safe choice is to exit that situation. So understanding how a dog behaves and what they're perceiving is far more important than having a dog that listens to you under every single circumstance. The dog should be allowed to exercise the right to leave any situation in which it feels uncomfortable, especially with a child, because the alternative is it's standing its ground. And that can look very different depending on the type of dog.
And that kind of goes both ways, right? Like teaching the dog boundaries with the kid, but then teaching your kid boundaries with the dog too, right?
Oh,
Because,
yeah.
yeah, because there will be times where, my daughter, when she was, so she's almost 2, but when she was, I think it was like right around 1, she started biting him. She started biting the dog, right? Like the opposite situation, like started biting his ears. And, and it was teething. So she didn't, she just would put anything in her mouth.
Yeah.
And he's so tolerant. He's like 100-pound lab, just like so lazy, so gentle. But she bit him one time, us not paying attention, and he squealed. And so then after that, and I mean, anytime we were around the dog, we're like, you don't bite the dog. You would think you'd have to do the opposite, but we had to really just like be on her and be firm with her that like this is what you do, and you pet the doggy, and like you go gentle and you don't bite the doggy's ears. So I mean, it took time, but it was like we had to teach her that like he has his own boundaries and everything too, right?
Oh, yeah, it definitely goes both ways. And I tell people all the time, the challenge here, you can have a great dog, but kids are not known for their natural ability to cooperate and listen. Like I walk into
Right.
my daughter's preschool. Look, really, preschool is pretty okay, but the early preschool, when they were all between 2.5 and 3.5, you would walk in some days and you're like, God bless the early education teachers, because these kids, none of them are doing the same thing at the same time. They
Yeah,
all have
feral.
their own agenda and they're all pursuing it. And that's really tough with a dog. And as a parent, to just know that you have to be there consistently, having a set of rules that doesn't change. Like we are never allowed to nibble on the dog. Some of the people that I go in, these behaviors, they think they're funny, and they may be funny once or twice. Like you tell me that story, I can absolutely laugh and appreciate that it is silly that would be the situation, and I can definitely see the humor in it. And if you allowed it to continue, I would be like, oh, hey, that's wrong. But you're like, I saw this was a problem, and therefore every single time they interacted, I had to make sure that I led the interaction. That's really what I want people to be able to do. And a lot of times, people are like, well, I can't watch all the time. Well, then the dog needs to be put away. Like, if you can't watch all the time, like, I live in Arizona, and it's the same thing as having a pool. Like, I wouldn't just be like, oh, I let my kids play outside unsupervised because I can't watch all the time next to this large body of water. That would be ridiculous. Like, when I frame it to people that like our pets are predators with teeth, is their natural like animal space in the animal kingdom. And we have to acknowledge that and understand that some are way more docile than others. Like 100-pound lazy lab. I love that. We have one, his name's Hudson. We call him the potato. He's literally like the chillest dog in the world. I trust him to do just about anything. And my daughter walked him when he was like when she was 1.5. Like, I never had any concerns, but I still wouldn't like, leave them unquote, like unattended. It's just kind of important that people just are aware that they need to guide the interactions no matter what.
So on the topic of biting, how about the other side of the coin? So like my daughter bit our dog, but what about dogs that bite, either a human or a child? Should that dog be rehomed, or how do you navigate that with a family?
There's definitely different reasons that dogs bite. And the most important, like, I've had a couple different people call me and they'll be like, oh, the dog snapped in the baby's direction. And that was like our sign that we needed to start having a lot more rules and it's generally between that 1 and 2 years of age. And we really needed to be on top of their interactions and guide them and teach the dog to walk away when it felt uncomfortable. There are times where there's warnings and we can kind of work through that and have a lot of management tools. And then there's other times where it's really serious. I had a family call me and they said our dog bit our 8-month-old baby on the head, jumped down from the couch, bit her on the head. And I said, did it like shake, which is a dog killing an animal or killing anything? She said no, but we've also lost our homeowner's insurance before because the dog has bit someone. This is not like this has happened before. We brought the baby home, put it in a bassinet. The dog stood up on the bed, looked over the bassinet and growled at the baby. Like, there was a lot of things that led up to this moment, and they just were kind of hoping that it would stop. And that is a situation in which I say to them, I don't care who you talk to or what you pay, what amount of money you pay to whoever you pay it, whether it's me or someone else. There's no one on this planet that can guarantee you your child's safety 100% for the future. And you need to explore the options of rehoming that dog. They were able to return it to the rescue. And I said they need to make sure that it doesn't get placed with any kids. I don't have the whole story on what happened after, but that's definitely a situation in which I help families understand, like, do you ever want to host a birthday party? Like, do you want your child to have friends over? Can you guarantee safety? Can you, even if you put the dog in a crate with behind a, in a room with the door closed, like my almost 2-year-old can open the front door if we didn't have the little latches at the top he could just walk outside. Kids are not known for following directions. And there are definitely situations in which it's just not safe. And so, I've also helped people through the choice to do like a behavioral euthanasia, who they had a really challenging dog. That dog did something very major to them. And part of the decision was, well, do you ever want to have a family? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, then you can continue down this road where we manage this dangerous behavior, or we can, help this dog pass and we can get you a dog that's more appropriate for your goals in your future. That's also something I've helped people do. But I think it's really just a matter of looking at everyone. There is, like, what I might do for a dog might be different than what the family can do for the dog. And I can't take every single dog. right? I'm not a sanctuary. That's not my role in this animal world. It's just really important to take a look at the whole picture of what the family can do and what the dog has done and what the dog is capable of doing, and helping them decide what the right path is. Generally, it's something like rehoming or returning to the rescue. But yes, every once in a while, there is a case that pops up. If a dog like attacks its owner, which happened this year, and I said, do you want to have a family? Do you want to have kids? Is that in your future? And she said, yeah. And she was afraid of her dog, you know? So that was a hard one. And I had known that dog 6 years, by the time they made that decision. And I was the only one who could watch the dog and all these things. And yeah, that was tough. It was sad. But for the most part, the people who contact me who have had dogs that have either snapped or I don't really, the head bite was really the only one where the dog had like done something pretty serious. But it's just taking everything into account. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I went to help a family, and they had 2 under 2, and the dog was a great dog. I mean, I considered for a half a second when they were considering rehoming, keeping the dog myself. It was a really good dog. They ended up finding a home for it. But I looked at the mom, and she's got a 2-year-old, a 3-week-old. And I said, do you want more kids? And they had 2 dogs. The other dog was super chill. I said, do you want more kids? She said, yeah, we want 4. And I was like, well, then I don't know. You're already overwhelmed with all of this. And this dog seems to be the source of all of your concern. Like, do you want to do this with baby number 3 and baby number 4? And by then the dog is just getting older and older. And they found someone who was willing to take that dog on like within 3 days. And like I said, great dog, went to a great family. It just was like a lateral move for the dog. And that was not really because of the dog's behavior, but because the parents were so overwhelmed with what was on their plate. And that's okay too. Postpartum's hard. Like having little babies is really hard. We have a ton of expectations on us.
My parents had to rehome a dog when I was young. I was like 6 or 7, so I don't remember a ton, but my mom had just had my younger brother and then was pregnant with my sister when he was just 3 months old. So she was about to have like 2, and like they were 13 months apart. And we had this lab, and he was nuts. I mean, they tried obedience training back then. I mean, this was the 90s, right? So like there wasn't social media, there wasn't like, right?
You had to go to Barnes and Noble and buy a book about dog training
or obedience training, right?
Yeah.
Like that's all they really knew. So yeah, like I was 6 or 7, and we had only had him, I think, a couple years, but he was just nuts. Like he'd constantly be, tearing the house apart and like biting the furniture, ripping the furniture apart, and then Philly, the little baby at the time, knocking him over once he was walking. And then my mom's like, and I'm gonna have another one, and then like I can't do this with this dog. So like you said, like that was just reason enough for them to rehome him. And he ended up becoming a hunting dog, which was way better for his personality and everything like that, right? Like it was just, that's what needed to happen. But talk about an excited dog being just as dangerous as an aggressive dog, because we touched on that a little bit about milestones.
Yeah, basically an excited dog, if it's going to jump, if it's going to run, if it's going to knock things over, like you were just talking about with the lab, even though it's not physically putting its mouth on a child, it doesn't mean that someone can't get hurt. And usually like those are most of the injuries that happen between dog and child in my house are simply because someone stepped on my toe, or someone ran into someone. And we joke that our kids are soccer players. We're like, oh my gosh, this is the most dramatic. Like someone barely touches my 1.5-year-old and he's like, throws himself on the floor and he wants to cry. And we're like, okay, this is very dramatic. And so most of the small things just happen from dogs being excited. But when that excitement gets really out of control, and like, or the dog is really big, like I just worked with a family, they have a 12-year-old and a rather big husky mix. He's a big dog. And what we talked about actually was a nice little conversation. They would say things, and I think we're all guilty of this, like stand up for yourself, like tell the dog no, right? Like you think this is an older child, they understand what you mean. And we ended up having a really unique conversation about like we as adults, right, have whole histories and files of what the phrase stand up for yourself means, right? Like I'm 39. I've had to stand up for myself in a lot of different ways. Health, mental health, friendships, relationships, all of those things. So when I say I've got to stand up for myself, I have a really good understanding of what that means. If you had told 12-year-old me, just say no, stand up for yourself, I don't have nearly as much life experience, behind that. And so that was actually a really unique kind of like thing we learned in that interaction, that like we as parents sometimes assume our kids know so much more than they do because we just think we're, giving them all of our wisdom. And really the dog just needs a little bit more coaching on the fact that even though you're being joyful and happy at seeing a member of the family, this dog, if it stood and put its paws on your shoulders, it was as tall as me. And that's overwhelming to a child. That's a really big dog. And so basically like kids don't want to be scratched. They don't want to be, some children have, sensory, aversions to being licked. A lot of kids do not like when the dog licks them. That is one thing I've learned a lot with working with families. And that is a completely benign action, but it's still something that can make kids really uncomfortable. And so it is our job to, honor those things in our kids and help them, feel okay saying those things, because I do want, my daughter doesn't like when the dogs get her clothes dirty. Like if their hair, like we have really hairy dogs. If she gets a bunch of hair on on her clothes, she doesn't like that. And that just comes from a dog like sharing love. And so it's our job to keep the dog at a level in which everybody's kind of having fun, because even though it seems silly to say like, oh, grow up, it's dog hair, like that's kind of what a lot of parents want to say. Yeah, we do want to teach our kids to be resilient, but we also have to find that balance of like hearing them and honoring what they ask for, because as they grow up, that's going to be important.
Initially postpartum, how can moms navigate that relationship with their dog? Like right when they come home from the hospital, maybe they're healing from birth, right? Whether it's a
Yeah.
C-section or vaginal. So how do they navigate that relationship early on?
I think a lot of that gets, I would say it's okay to outsource that. Like for me, it was my dad. My dad loves throwing the ball for like when my dog was, I think he was like 13 when my daughter was born. And he loved being of service in that way, coming over and spending time with the dogs and taking them on a walk. My husband was a big part of that. I'm really lucky because I have a dog training company. I had employees that were able to socialize my dogs and play with my dogs. But for parents who don't have a dog training facility in their house, I would say include your dog on your registry. It's okay to like put a little slush fund aside for doggy day camp or a dog walker. So, my goal in those first, like that fourth trimester, is to keep you away from feeling that guilt of not being able to do stuff with them. And, some of those things like doggy daycare, obviously that is a very, if there's an expense there, I don't expect everyone to be able to afford it, especially during a time in which we're managing like different types of parental leave and things like that. I don't expect everyone to be forking over hundreds of dollars for pet care. But if we can, like I said, include a little slush fund for doggy on the baby registry, which I guarantee you people love to take care of the dog. They will chip in. It happens all the time. But having a plan. And then also, if you are doing it alone, it's as simple as all I'm going to ask you for is 5 minutes. I remember with my husband came to me, my daughter was, maybe 10 days old. And he's like, would you say hi to your dogs? They really miss you. And some of it is, like after you have a baby and you are going through like your postpartum like bleeding and everything, every time I was around my dogs, they were like very interested in me. And that was annoying to me because I had a baby that was now connected to me. And then everything wanted to touch me and be close to me. And that felt really overwhelming. And I just had to stop and say, like, okay, I can give them 5 minutes of just sitting together. Or it was gradual over those first few months of like, okay, well, we can watch a movie together while we do our family nighttime routine, when baby was really teeny tiny. And it's just thinking ahead of and finding little moments in your day. It doesn't have to be a walk, it doesn't have to be getting everyone outside, it doesn't have to be training, it can just begin with just those 5 minutes. Or like, if you do get a chance to have someone come, um, and you can take a nap with your dog. Those things are nice too. I don't want people to think I'm taking away 100% everything with their dog in the beginning. Those things are important to us too, of what we can get out of their relationship. So just find little ways.
It also kind of depends on how big the dog is too, right? I mean, I mean, like we
Yeah.
never have, our big guy does not sleep in bed with us. Like he's huge. Like he never has. We even have a king bed now, and we're still like, I don't know. That was just I know that there's a lot of people that like that's what they do, right? The dog sleeps in their bed, but we didn't want a dog in our bed. We never wanted a baby in our bed. That was just like, our bed is our bed. And that's always been our boundary, right? But yeah. So what about parents? What about if you don't have a baby or you don't have a dog and now you have children and you want to get a puppy for the family? Like how do you navigate doing that when they're maybe toddlers or like small children and getting a puppy for the family?
Be prepared to turn down a lot of dogs. And I say that with, I just rescued a dog. I didn't go into rescues or shelters because I was like, oh, I want a rescue dog. I, being in the industry, know that we can provide an excellent home to a dog that otherwise wouldn't have one. And I wanted to explore every single opportunity before I started doing research on any breeder dogs. And there's nothing wrong with breeder dogs. There's a lot of great breeders out there. It's just people, I wanted to start with a rescue. I was completely willing to look at the breeder side of things if I couldn't find what I was looking for. I'm at 35 dogs before I adopted my dog. So I knew I wanted low energy. I knew I didn't want a cattle dog or a husky or a German shepherd. I also, side note, have a Pomsky, which is a Pomeranian and a husky, and he was given to us by a client who couldn't handle him. He's 5 now and he's manageable, but for the first 4 years, he was kind of a nightmare. He's great with dogs, but he was not a family pet. So I knew I wanted like a very resilient, calm, mellow dog that was going to respect my children. I wanted a lot of things for it to be like that dog's default behavior. And I reached out to a friend in California. I'm in Arizona. And I said, hey, am I being crazy? Like, am I chasing a unicorn? Like, once you hit dog 30, you're like, okay, maybe it doesn't exist. Right. And she sent me a picture of a dog. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's my dog. And I showed it to my husband and he's like, oh my gosh, that's the one. And I drove 7 hours to go get her and 7 hours home. And we introduced her to our kids. And she has been exactly everything we had hoped for. I mean,
What
there's like
kind of
some
dog?
puppy stuff.
What kind of dog?
She is someone in the litter did a DNA test, and she's like 44% pit bull, a little bit shepherd, and a little bit boxer, which is so funny because I'm not a boxer fan. I'm sorry to anyone who loves boxers. They're not my favorite. They're just a little hyper for me. So I was surprised that she was so calm, but she is just so cute, and she has so many things about her that remind us of our dogs that passed away last year. And I wasn't looking for just like a carbon copy of them, but she just has so many things about her that were traits we loved about them. And so if someone's going to come to me and they say, what kind of dog do you want? Like, it's so funny working with people. There was a parent at my daughter's school, and they said, oh, we're kind of active. We like to hike on the weekends. I want a dog I don't have to, low maintenance grooming, low energy. We really like mini Australian shepherds. And I was like, there's a high energy dog that requires grooming every 6 weeks. So you don't really want a low energy dog that doesn't require grooming, because you just told me the breed that you want and they're not at all what you said you want. And I had to say to that person exactly that. Like, you can't, yes, there are certain, like, even within labs, like there's the potatoes and then there's the working labs. And like, just because you get a lab doesn't mean you're getting like the potato. You could, if you're going to work with, whoever is providing the dog, they really need to have a good understanding of like temperament, because breed isn't always one thing. And so you really have to go and meet the dogs and see how they're interacting with other dogs. And really, or like I got the information from the person that was fostering our dog, and they had really sound behavior understanding, like of dog behavior. And I really trusted their judgment when they described the dog to me. And when I saw the dog in videos, I could see that they were being truthful and honest in their evaluation of the dog. So I just think it's really important to like go and meet them and really think about like, how do you want to spend your weekends? Do you want a dog that's easy to train? Do you want a dog that's going to just like fit in with your family, that doesn't require like a ton of work to make that happen? And things like grooming, that's a expense every 6 weeks. And for some dogs, it's an extraordinary expense. Like, you get into some of these doodles, you're paying like $150 every 6 weeks to have it. They're like shearing sheep. Some of their coats are so tight and curly. And those are things that people need to consider. And mostly, temperament is just so important. And I was very surprised when they told us the mixture of breeds our dogs was, because I was like, oh, I would have expected a dog that is pit bull, husky, and boxer to be like kind of high energy. And it just so happens that of the litter, she's just kind of this like lazy gal. And that works for us. She is just the right amount of energy for our family, which makes taking care of her very, very easy. And so I just, I don't want people to go, like, when I decided I was ready for a dog, I didn't just go get a dog. It took months to find the dog that we wanted for our family. And so I love helping people pick dogs. And I have a friend who is really, really good at it. I was like, you should do dog matchmaking. The one who found our puppy, she's like, I love picking out dogs for people. This is my favorite thing to do. But I did get some heat. Because I said on social, like, I knew I didn't want a husky, and I knew I didn't want a cattle dog. Like, the genetic predisposition of both of those breeds are not, I already know. I've worked with a lot of dogs. I've had a foster husky for 2 years. We do not vibe together. Like, we like each other. We're fine. But as a member of my family, no, like, it's not what I'm looking for as a member of my family. So I think it's just important to go and be willing to say no until you find the perfect dog.
On the topic of breeds, are there certain breeds that you think are real, like just in general, like really good with families, like great with kids? And then are there breeds that are, or is that just, does it really just depend on the dog? Because like you could find like a super laid back, awesome pit bull, and then I feel like you can get pit bulls who are really scary and dangerous, and like same for like a German Shepherd. So like, what do you
Yeah.
like? how do you have certain breeds that you were just like, doesn't even matter temperament, like this breed is going to be solid with a family and this breed is not?
I don't think there's any breed that I can definitely say is solid, but I will tell people like if you're it's really genetics. And so like even like we had a weird like within my dog training community just recently people were like what's with all these psychopathic golden retrievers? Like well, I'm getting these goldens that are doing like very atypical golden retriever like behavior. They're biting people, they're vicious, they're crazy high energy, and a lot of that is just from bad breeding. And so, you know, I would say breeds that are not like super popular, you're going to have a higher likelihood of better breeding because the people are more particular and you don't have as many like, oh, I think I'll just start breeding dogs today kind of situations. And so I would say the person who was asking me what kind of dog they should get, I said, you know, I have a lot of really good luck recently in the last few years with really stable, like Portuguese water dogs. If they're looking for something in the doodle family, I recommend something like a legato, which is a real, like they look like doodles, but it's a real breed. Not that golden doodles aren't real breeds, but they're a hybrid breed. And there's a lot of bad players in that breeding game. And so I would say, you know, when it comes to rescues, you're going to find it's, you'll want to look for a couple things like, were they rejected by their mother? That's going to be a red flag that that dog may have some behavior issues down the line. Or like how how they were handled during their imprint stages. That's going to be really important. And so basically, I mean, across the board, there's a lot of the dogs that I find are most well paired to their families are the dogs where the breeders have chosen the puppy for the family. And that's a really popular thing with like labs. Um, and they'll a lot of these are dogs that are like being bred for something specific, and then when it comes to like they'll pick the ones that are meant for service dogs, they'll pick the ones that are meant for families, they'll pick the ones that are good, you know, and that I see a lot of really good luck with. But just overall, temperament is gonna be your number one go-to thing, because like you said, like I've had both. I've had pit bulls that were like the dangerous one that you didn't want to pass on the street, and then one that was like amazing with kids and like a total lamb. And it just both of them just had completely different starts in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you learn the most about the dog training experience when you became a mom?
I really learned that I had to be gentle with myself. I had to really take things one day at a time. I had to slow down and think about what was best for myself and what was best for my family. And I mean, as my business changed dramatically, which it's really it's funny because like so this business is in our house, right? So it's a big part of our life. It's here 24 hours a day. Um, it was just a complete transformation for me as a human, like in how I related to every part of how I ran my business, how I wanted my daughter to see me as like a woman in this world, how I protected my family, how I gave away my time. I just had a conversation with someone yesterday. They were like, "Oh, it's a total." They had said on a social media thing, it is a total red flag if someone won't like openly give you a tour of their entire home if your dog is going to board with them. And I was like, no. If you want to come see my home, like you have to remember that my children are here. Like this is our piece, and you don't get to come here and have us audition for you so you can decide whether or not you want to use our services. The only people who get to enter my intimate and spiritual space where I raise my family are people who are also seeking to have like a lifelong training behavior relationship in which we're working together for the better of your dog. But I'm not going to just like willy-nilly open my doors to whoever wants to come traipsing through here and be around my kids or be around my dogs. And they weren't saying to do that either. Like they have a process. But it was just one of those things that sparked such an emotional reaction for me that I was like, that is ridiculous. Like, I'm not just going to let anyone have my address and come traipsing through here. Like, and that's because I feel so protective of my family and my kids. And I would way rather protect my family and my kids and potentially lose business than be someone who is so focused on work and providing for others that I lose sight of what is most important in my day to day, which is my family and my kids.
Yeah, for sure. It does change everything, right? Like obviously it's changed the way, you do business in itself. So how do you help clients now? Like do you just, I mean, I know you said you run it out of your house, so you just train dogs out of your house. Do you have courses online? Like how do you help people?
Yeah, we have a baby pack leader community. It's free to join the community. And then within that community, we have different like training modules, and we have what are called woof workshops. So the one we're doing next is all on the walk, and people can join virtually or in person. And yeah, I do a lot of helping people in their homes. And one of our favorite services is our bringing home baby program. So people call us and they say, hey, it's go time. I'm on my way to go have my baby. There's a key under the mat. Go get my dog. Obviously, there's an entire vetting process that happens before this. And an entire conversation about how this is going to go. And we take the dogs while they're having their baby at a birthing center or at the hospital or a pool in their living room, however they choose to do it. And when they're ready, we bring the baby home and we help them with that initial introduction. Because birth is crazy. Lots of things can happen. Most of the time it goes pretty smoothly in textbook, but every once in a while, I still am experiencing things with people where I'm like, huh, I've never heard of that one before. Well, you just let us know when you're ready. And so that's a really wonderful and fun way to support parents and families. But I always say it leaves me wanting another, because I go and I introduce the dog to the baby and I'm like, I want another baby. It's a really dangerous game. I'm going to end up with like 10 kids doing this, because every time, or I also teach a class at a place called Modern Milk in Scottsdale. And I do an in-person like dog and baby prep class there. And every time I leave, I'm like, I should definitely have another baby. So much trouble. It's so bad.
That's so funny. That's a really cool service. I didn't think about that, but yeah, I guess a lot of people, I mean, for me, I'm like, oh, I have parents that live close or family, but if you're someone who, if you don't have family that lives close, or people that could do it, like that's a really cool service. So where can people find you? Online, website, just so I can put this information. I'll put it in the show notes as well, but where can people find you?
Babypackleader.com has everything. It has a link to our Instagram, Baby Pack Leader, our Facebook, Baby Pack Leader. They're all the same. But yeah, I just like to have a lot of resources available, free resources, paid resources, anything you need. And you can always set up a call with me one-on-one direct. And I'm there to coach, there to help.
Do you have an
I just
Instagram as well?
Yes, it's at Baby Pack
At
Leader.
Baby Pack Leader. Okay, cool. I love it. Okay, so before we hop off, I always ask this question at the end, and you could totally relate yours when it comes to, introducing dog to baby, new family, but what is some advice that you would give a first time mom?
Oh, just be nice to yourself. It's so much change. And remember that if you just go through it day by day, um, eventually you're going to look back and it's all going to be okay.
It does all change all the time, right?
Yeah. Just like be nice to yourself. That is really my biggest piece of advice. Be nice to yourself.
Yes.
And if you
Yes.
use a bassinet, make sure it has wheels. That's some real genuine advice. Mine didn't have wheels, and I was like, oh my gosh. With my first, I did not have any wheels in my bassinet. And then with my second, my mom got me this like atrocious, it was the scariest, most Rosemary Baby scary like bassinet thing, but it had wheels. And we used that thing all the time. We would just wheel the baby into the shower, not the shower, like the
The
bathroom.
bathroom. Yeah.
Wheel the baby
Yeah.
into the kitchen so you can make dinner. And he was like always right there. And I was like, this is fantastic. That's my real piece of advice.
Oh.
Make sure your bassinet is on wheels.
That kind of seems a little dangerous, but also helpful. And depending on if you have two stories in your house too, you know.
Oh yeah, it's not going to be as
Yeah.
effective with two. We're in
I know
Arizona.
you
We're all
live. You're
ranch
in
homes.
Arizona. You're all ranches, so that totally makes sense. But I'm like, then I'm thinking I would need two. Then, like, I would need one upstairs and one downstairs.
One downstairs.
And, gosh, I need a ranch.
Yeah,
but
don't do it. Don't have it near the stairs, and make
Yeah,
sure it's
exactly.
like approved for safe sleep. But this one, it was so funny. She gave it to us, and we were like, this is frightening. And then I was like, oh, we should use that bassinet. And then it was like, it
The
became
best
a joke
thing.
that it was
Yeah.
like the best thing. But they grow out of
That's
it
so
pretty
funny.
quick.
They
Now
do.
he's like,
They do.
now I feel like he's gonna start driving. He's like only a year and a half, and I'm like, how are you as tall as your sister? She's almost 4. It's crazy.
Yeah, boy. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the information. This was so great, so informative. I know that it is definitely a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I know many of my listeners. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, you heard Aileen. So if you want to get help from her, babypackleader.com. You can follow her Facebook page and Instagram at babypackleader. I'll have her information in the show notes so that you can connect with her if you need help. So thanks so much for listening, guys. See you next time.